We're in the throes, one way of putting it, bringing out a new edition of Walking with the Himalayan Master. We're going at it tooth and nail, as they say. Hopefully it'll be done in the next few days. And then it hit the publisher. And as I was reading it, and writing parts of it again, I was recalling some things with Swami Rama, and some of the issues that came up with people way back when we started several years ago. And one of the things he brought up is this whole marvelous phenomena called emotion. Emotion. The ancients called them passions. And the ancients had an interesting approach to it in the West. I'm talking here now. Both in the Greek period of 2,000 years ago, where there was enormous reflection, and also in the Roman period, but even into the Middle Ages, 13th century, 700 years ago. They saw built into us is what they called an appetite. They didn't mean for food. They meant the striving, the emotional striving into life. And they saw this striving as moving in two directions, one of two directions. Either towards the object or away from it. And they said once the emotion is stimulated by the mind, as it were, it presents to it, hey, there is something there, then the emotion would give the energy, so to speak, once the mind consents, to move the individual, the agent, towards an object or avert it, withdraw. And I think one of the reasons we sometimes have difficulty with our emotions is that we feel helpless at times. Welcome. Because the object of emotion is outside of us. The emotion is felt inside, obviously, but the object is outside. An individual, an event, an incident, someone says something, or you see something, and you're moved by that. Interestingly, that's what the word passion means, to be moved. So there's two parts here to look at. The object and the individual or the agent being moved towards the object or away. And as I say, we sometimes feel quite helpless because we forget that, the object is outside of us, and there ain't much I can do sometimes. Now, we can't change this weather. Ooh, it's cold out there. We feel that. And we're driving along and suddenly we hit a patch of ice and woo, we start to slide again. It's an external. It provokes a little anxiety, maybe even fear, based upon our evaluation of that object and what's going on. But of all the things that we have to be careful about, I think is illustrated in the story I'm about to tell you. I once lived in Israel. I was doing research in archaeology and Hebrew studies. I went there with the University of Wisconsin for the summer, 3 months. It's quite an interesting time. And we had a lot of fun digging up things. I got in everybody's way and so on, but as I was a beginner, a greenhorn. And shortly thereafter, the famous 6-Day War broke out. I don't know if you people can remember that. This is when the Arabs and the Jews had an enormous war. But it was only 6 days. Interesting. And during that time, there were all kinds of battles going on, both on land and in the air. And people would be glued to their radio to find out what was going on because they could see the planes dogfighting above them. Can you imagine? And the official army narrator would give the score, how many planes we've lost, how many we've defeated in the enemy. And they would often get very graphic. They would tell you who the pilot was because every plane had a number and the number was assigned to a pilot. And so the words came over one day. An elderly gentleman was listening because his son was a pilot, and they said, particular F-16 was shot down. They gave the number, and he recognized the number as belonging to his son. And he keeled over. He had a heart attack. 20 minutes later, the narrator corrected himself. He misread the number. The son was still alive. The gentleman was not. For him to go through that into the throes of death, there had to be a mammoth emotional experience. But there's the distinction that is often forgotten about when we go through severe emotional crises. On the one hand, there is the pain of recognition. Oh my God, it's my boy. On the other, it's the shock. I've lost my son. The pain didn't kill him. The shock did. And this is where yoga steps in. Yoga wants to eliminate the shock primarily. It'll get to the pain. Because the pain won't kill you, the shock will. It's the shock to the nervous system that can jeopardize your existence. And many people reel from life. The loss of a loved one, loss of a job, a sudden severe turn in events that, they come home and their house has been burned down or something, Now it's the shock that hurts them. It does the damage. The pain does not. The emotional discomfort does not. It's the pain of the shock that traumatizes the nervous system and causes the severe internal disruption. So how does Mr. Yoga come in now and deal with that? Well, there are a couple different ways. We don't want this to happen to you and then jump into yoga because it's a little late. We want you to get prepared how to deal with that ahead of time. So if it should come in your life, I can handle the shock. I'll go through the pain, but I'll definitely handle the shock so it won't occur, at least in any great depth. See, there's no medical care for shock. There is for pain, but not for shock. And if you get caught up in the shock, it is devastating. It can cause death. So, how do we do it? Well, first thing is to remember that worry is never genuine. You gotta start thinking about that. Worry is never genuine. It's a false call. But, I just lost all my stocks. Yeah. So, or someone came down with a severe illness, yes. Or you're worried about your company. Again, worry is not genuine. Things are happening. And so you got to remember two basic things about life. It is the nature of nature to change, not to remain stable for long. We have a season. It lasts so many weeks or months, and then it changes. And it's been changing all through that. There's a certain relative stability, but nature changes, and so does culture. This is not a matter of negotiation. This is not a matter for democratic voting. This is the way things are. And that leads to the second point. In yoga, we want to discern what is going on, not what we want, but what is really going on out there. And face it, understand it. Because in that understanding, we can avoid the shock. It's when we don't grasp what's going on, we can hurt ourselves. If something is very unexpected and forms a crisis in our life. When we understand, we forge an attitude. We have a certain poise, if you will. Yes, I know these things can happen. I've seen other things happen. You've managed to get through the scuffs, and you've skinned your shins a few times in life, and you've managed to somehow survive. So your understanding is not just for the simple act of knowing what's going on. There is a stronger consequence, namely, it leads to control. Emotional control. People panic because they don't know what's going on. And their mind goes to the worst. And that's the second part of control. It's in our imagination and in our speculations, mental speculations, and our images that require a certain direction, which can be exercised over them through understanding. So the more I know, the more I'm prepared. The more I can maintain a certain sense of stability. Now, you can't just think yourself into this. This is the catch. This is where all the self-improvement seminars flop. They can only go up to the intellectual part, which is fine. But the presumption is that's all you need. Sorry. The yogi says, no, you need one more factor to be involved, and that is training. You must be trained to deal with the shock. You must be trained to be able to control the imagination and the speculation. And if you can do that, you've got the emotion, because emotion follows cognition. I can't emote over something I don't know. If I don't know what's going on, even if it's behind me, I can't show any emotion towards it or away from it, because I don't know what's there. So the two go together. Emotion never acts on its own. It always follows some kind of knowledge, even if the knowledge is made up. Because oftentimes we make up fears that don't have a basis. Okay, we think this is going to happen, and therefore, oh boy, I start to feel the emotion. Or I think this is what had already happened, and I react to that. So emotion is there, is your companion, is your help, but it needs to be guided by understanding. So what I don't understand, I leave open to emotion sometimes, and that can get me into trouble. So, yoga says, let's go one step further. Let's go much deeper. Let's remember one factor, way in the background, but overarching everything. And that is, this world is for you to use and enjoy, but not possess. And oftentimes when we cling, we set ourselves up for a shock. Because we often attribute more reality to something than what's really there. And then it disappoints us. We feel let down. And really, we set ourselves up for that because we refused to see what was really there. Instead, we imposed what we wanted on people, on things, on our expectations. And, we think it's all over now. I've lost it all. So in yoga, in the manual that is the classic identified with yoga, the sutras, the Patanjali Sutras, it is a textbook. Not a textbook on theory, but it's a textbook on the mechanics, if you will, of how to live. So it's a manual for building a lifestyle that works. And this is what I mean by the training. We call it in the West, well, you got to get experience. You got to get on the job. That's what I'm talking about. You build up the skills so that when the challenge comes, you're ready. And that's why practice is so important. There are two great concepts in the beginning of the yoga manual. One is called abhyasa. It means practice. And the other is called vairagya. It's often translated sometimes as indifference or detachment. That doesn't really convey it. The two belong together because one forges the other. One fosters the other. The practice fosters vairagya. Vairagya means to see things as they really are and respond accordingly. When you respond accordingly, then you don't grab, you don't possess, you don't hoard, because that's not what it's about. But in order to appreciate that, you practice. And what do you practice? What you already know. Your meditation, your postures, your holistic approach to life. Body, mind, and spirit. Keeping those in order, your order. And it changes as you grow older. It has to, because that's the nature of things. But the principles are always steady. You keep adapting those principles to the circumstances. And that's the interesting part. How should I do it now, given my circumstances? Now sometimes we feel that somehow if we really set it up out there, it'll be better in here. You know, if I have better clothes, I'll meditate better. If my meditation pillow is silk, I'll go deeper. It doesn't work that way. But we sometimes get caught off guard and think it works that way. Huh? No. Don't confuse the two. You know, we get this, if only I could, then I know I'd meditate better. If I lived in a better neighborhood, there'd be less noise, less traffic, you know. I'd really go to samadhi. No time at all. Doesn't work that point. The point is, the world is there. It is a reality. And for the most part, you're not going to change it. So get used to it. Adapt to it. I don't mean surrender to it. I said adapt. You don't have to forfeit who you are. You maintain your dignity. But recognize where the limitations of the world exist, as well as its joy. See, the trouble starts when we presume we can control that outward world very limitedly. You know that when you get into traffic. You think everybody just came out to get in your way sometimes, you know, especially when you're in a hurry to get somewhere. It's amazing how thick the traffic becomes at that moment. No, it's not raining on your picnic, it's just raining. So switch your picnic to indoors. That kind of dexterity is meant to come about through your practice. Abhyasa, vairagya. And this is why one of the definitions of yoga as it shows up in the Bhagavad Gita is skillful actions. I know how to be nimble in these situations. I'm not going to sit there and cry my eyes out because the picnic was spoiled. Or my computer broke down like mine did 2 days ago. I only cried for 12 hours. I mean, I got over it, you know. Boy. It happens, huh? Show me what's out there that's going to survive time. This, for me, I see nature as a magnificent metaphor for the entire universe, just about. Nature goes through seasons, unless you live in Florida. You only have 2, wet and dry. So your mind is like an incredible powerhouse that's working with a few companions. One of them is called emotion, and it needs them. Your mind won't go anywhere without the juice. So the emotions are there to serve the mind, not the other way around. And it's not a servile relationship. It's one that enables the mind to express itself. That's what emotions are for. Without them, you would be awfully boring. You'd have a personality of a telephone book. But with the emotions, hey, we got a living being. Someone who can express what's inside, whether it be knowledge or love, encouragement, whatever. So they belong together, and they belong in a certain order. And gently working with yourself, you can re-establish the order if you find it's a little out of kilter. The Greeks and the medieval masters said we're a bundle of habits. So do the yogis. Habit is something that's forged. It's not an algorithm. No, it's not that mechanical. It's more like an art. When I was in Japan, I took a course in sumi painting. They used just black ink on white, you know. And I used to watch the teacher, and I thought her hand was magical. The way she could draw a bamboo stick or a blossom. And of course, she tried to teach us. And after about 3 months, I said, the problem is the brush, not me. So once again, it was out there, huh? She said, here, try my brush. I got the same results. Huh? You gave me the faulty one. Oh, no. Okay. No. It's through practice. What you have going for you is an amazing law that's hidden away in the use of energy. If you pay attention, there is a slight improvement. You may not find it discernible, but there is. When you came to a Hatha course the first time, with great trepidation, embarrassment, feelings of competition, am I going to be better than that one? These were all impediments. But you also had the hope. So it was all mixed up. And with the help of the teacher, you gradually began to allow that emotion, that cognitive direction, to repeat itself with greater attention. And what was the result? Skill began to emerge in you. That's the law of reality. You don't have to be from an ethnic group to get that. This is the way we're built. So people say, well, I don't know what to do with my emotions. Yes, you do. A gentleman came to see me the other night. And athletic individual. But he wasn't so sure, is what I'm doing really worthwhile? He was having doubts, self-doubts about his career. So I listened. And he told me, and I'd ask him questions more about what do you do, how do you do it, how many students do you have. So I got the background which I wanted. And then I tried to, okay, you've told me this, let me see if I can summarize now, very succinctly what your issue is. And so he agreed that my summary wasn't too far off. And I said, I don't think you have a problem. I think you're imagining you have a problem. And you're believing that imagined problem and not the reality. He looked at me. And I wanted that, what do you mean, look? I wanted that. I said, well, look, you've had this number of students? Yes. I wanted the yeses out of them. Some of them have been with you 2.5 years? Yes. Mm-hmm. They've benefited? You've doubled your income? Yes. I went down the list. I said, where's the problem? Well, hold on. Maybe you should learn to doubt your doubts. The light went on. I said, we all have feelings at times that, am I doing the right thing? We all begin to question where we're going. And we allow that feeling, that emotion, to so capture our attention that it blinds us to all the value that we have accomplished in who we are. And so I was trying to get him to reflect back and pierce through that doubt, see that there was no substance to it. He just was in a little mood that was a little off. And hey, we all go through them. But let's hang in there with the reality. You are a good teacher, your students like you, you've doubled your income, You're growing, and you know this is what you want to do, right? Yeah. You can grow. We made a few suggestions. All of a sudden, things went back into alignment. There's a wisdom inside of us that we neglect at times when we doubt things on the surface about ourselves. And that obscures that inner wisdom that's ready to speak to you. And so this is the protection you have. Your training is your protection, so that you don't go veering off and getting all mixed up. The training is what allows the energy to be groomed in the right direction. And that has an impact on the cognitive level, your ability to grasp and see things, to perceive accurately and make correct judgments. Like anything else, if you let go of the practice, you get sloppy. People get cocky, especially when they're starting to get good. You see it in all the arts, and then they wonder. And then they start, oh, I remember what it was. Now you're not living in reality anymore, you're living in the past. And then the fears come, and they're always worried, usually about the future. But you're not in the present because you're not training. So it's the training that grounds you. It's the training that keeps you in touch with reality. It's the training that makes you see what is truly there and what is not. So it's that kind of common sense approach that yoga aspires to. It builds on your nature, but it says there's a potential there, you've got to actualize it, and you can only do that through training. Not through thinking about it, wishing for it. That doesn't do anything. You know that. So at times we just have to recognize that, hey, stop disturbing yourself. Doubt your doubts. And don't disturb others. Energy plus structure produces an outcome. You've got the energy, the structure is your training. And you see the outcome. You can't deny it. It's irrefutable. And in that way, then, you protect yourself against the shocks of life. They're out there. And through your training, then, you don't hold on to the painful past. You don't make excessive demands of the future on yourself. You don't try to put it all into one working day. It can't be done. You learn the rhythms of life. You stay in touch with things, especially yourself. That gives you the freedom. That brings a peace of mind sufficiently on a day-by-day basis.